The revolution is real, it's live, and as some comrades say, it's lit, right? Lit. The revolution is lit.
Uhuru Comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Yeshitela, Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study comes from Chairman's book, An Uneasy Equilibrium, Chapters 1, titled Challenging the Time Warp, pages 23 through 32, and Chapter 2, titled The Crisis of Imperialism, pages 33 through 57. You can access the study materials in the Facebook and YouTube descriptions. In this study, we will learn why it's important to study the Black Revolution of the 60s as a means for answering unresolved questions and advancing our struggle. But it can't be something that we are attempting to repeat if we intend to be successful. We will learn how the party prevailed despite the brutal, bloody assault waged on our movement by the U.S. government in the 60s, when we faced jailings, public assassinations, intimidation, and ideological confusion, otherwise known as the counterinsurgency. Our party survived and pushed forward, solving the problems of the revolution. We will learn the importance and significance of the party being the advanced attachment of the African working class, and why our party must lead the masses. We have a responsibility to raise the consciousness of the masses of African people, to bring them back into political life on a trajectory that will unite and free the African nation. We will understand why this task is important now more than ever in the era of the deepening crisis of imperialism. I am deeply honored to introduce the leader and founder of the African People's Socialist Party, a survivor of the counterinsurgency, the one who didn't surrender to the defeat, but instead kept fighting, sometimes alone, giving everything for his people, to build our glorious party, to establish the theory of the African working class that would solve the problems left unresolved after the counterinsurgency, and the brilliant author of An Uneasy Equilibrium, Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Uhuru Comrades, I want to thank everybody for coming on to this study today. And as it's been stated, we're going to be looking at the first two chapters of Uneasy Equilibrium, which was the political report to the 6th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. This Congress was held in 2013. And I just wanted to, first of all, say that we are repetitious so often, because it's really important at this time in history, when the crisis of this social system that was born on slavery, born of slavery and colonialism, genocide and what have you, when this crisis deepens and the possibilities of our struggle grow every day, it is absolutely necessary for us to achieve as much clarity as possible about what it is this struggle is about, and the fact that we are involved in a struggle, something that's not absolutely clear when you listen to or view the statements and articulations by people who are presumed to be leaders of our people at this particular time. The struggle is for science. The struggle is to make sure that during this period that we can achieve the greatest amount of clarity that we have to require of ourselves and other people who claim and other organizations that claim to represent us. We have to require maximum clarity about what it is that we are about. Right now is a time where we see the ruling class moving to actually capture, hijack many of the critical questions around which the future will be determined. One of these questions is reparations. Another is the issue of socialism. And we've got some nice looking people and some people who have achieved a certain amount of prestige who are willing to talk about reparations and talk about socialism today. And some people will be influenced by the fact that they are nice people and sometimes good-looking people who are talking about reparations and socialism. And most of us who will be participating in this discussion will be doing so without any recognition of the history of the movement, the struggle, and not being necessarily able to come to good conclusions about the outcomes that are necessary from these good-looking and respectable people who are now talking about socialism and reparations. I want to just say that the fact that there's going to be a discussion in the U.S. Congress around the question of reparations is directly due to the work that has been done by the African People's Socialist Party. I say this without hesitation, and I say this without any possibility of meaningful refutation by anybody on the planet. Our party is the organization that took this question of reparations, and first of all, the only organization that recognized that reparation was the function of revolution. It was not an attempt just to rush out and get some money. It was an attempt to change this entire social system, or certainly to change our relationship to the social system. And in addition to creating the circumstances under which African people can be guaranteed that we're going to have a quality life, that the labor and resources of Africa and African people would go to serve us and serve our future. That the struggle would open the door for the oppressed peoples around the world to change the kind of system that we live under, that we don't have to live in some kind of terror or fear, that some great white man or anybody, for that matter, can take our freedom away from us. This is when we started talking about the question of reparations. It wasn't just to go out and get some money. In fact, the African People's Socialist Party is the organization that was determined that reparations should be a mass issue, that the African people ourselves had to be brought into this discussion of reparations before it would be meaningful. We made a conscious decision that to make reparations a household word. That was nothing that was being pursued prior to this determination by the African People's Socialist Party. Prior to then, we did have some really good people who walked around with briefcases and who chased legislators and congresspersons to try to win them to the position of reparations, and that was wonderful. And we agree that's really important for that to have occurred. We had good people who were pursuing evidence that some cases could be made in the courts to get the courts to give reparations to African people, and we were not opposed to that. In fact, when we took up the demand for reparations, when we took this question, we recognized that a real reparations demand is something that the United States government could not respond to. It could not really deal with, nor could imperialist white power in general deal with this question in an effective way. That reparations was something that takes African people off of the defensive And by that I mean is that we have lived in a situation where under white colonial domination, that they have been able to convince Africans or many people around the world that we have this relationship because of their beneficence, that they're being good to us. They rescued us from jungles and savagery and ignorance and what have you. And that somehow our being enslaved by them was a favor that was done by them to us, so that now we have civilization and Christianity and a whole bunch of other nonsense like that. They've convinced so many black people, so many Africans, and of course they didn't have to work hard to convince white people of this, that it is we, African people, who live off the beneficence and welfare of white people, white power, etc. That was the situation that we were confronted with. And when we talked about reparations, initially when we got engaged in this discussion, people were talking about reparations who were trying to pursue the reparations issue as something that was due to black people just for slavery. And of course, what our party said was, if we look at it, and we did, if you investigate it, and we did, what you will determine is the rate of exploitation of African people has grown greater since slavery than what occurred during slavery itself. So we're not talking about just something that happened during slavery. We're talking about something that happened 30 minutes ago. We're talking about stuff that's going on even as we have this discussion now. Reparations. And then the other thing that was really important to us is this. And we said that we believe in reparations and that we wanted everybody who could be won to the position of reparations to be won to it. If there are congresspersons, if there are movie stars, if there are other people who could be won to reparations, the NAACP, Jesse Jackson, and the rest of them, then let's win everybody to reparations. Because the basic thing is to make reparations the vital issue, the vital question, because imperialism cannot respond to the reparations demand in an effective, real way. And so we said we would do this as a part of the process of advancing the interests of the revolution and of the African working class in particular, so who will have to lead the struggle for the liberation of the total African nation. That's what we did. In 1982, we held the first and only World Tribunal on Reparations for African People. We held it in Brooklyn, New York in 1982. This is a part of the process of making reparations a mass issue, bringing reparations to the masses of our people. So it's not just a handful of briefcase-toting black people who are running around trying to come to some kind of conclusions with politicians or with courts. It's now the possession of the masses. This is the thing that's going to give it the revolutionary character. We recognize that at the moment, African people who are stuffed in all of these prisons around the country, and in fact around the world, because of imposed poverty, colonial expropriation of all of our happiness and our resources. At the moment, the masses of people who are stuffed into these prisons, as they face judges in courtrooms around this country, and being charged with things like theft, and be able to stand up and look a judge in the face and say, I know who the real thief is. You are the thief. And I'm here not because I'm a thief. I'm here because I'm taking back what you have taken from us all this time. This is the beginning of a genuine revolutionary movement. This is what is going to make the difference of whether or not reparations mean something or not. Not what the U.S. Congress does, not any court ruling that will occur. And we are going to get court rulings, and we are going to see the U.S. Congress trying to do something, but this is going to be a part of a process of buying the revolution. They will try to give some kind of resources in order to frustrate the ability of the people to make revolution. So today, we see members of the Democratic Party, we even see things like Forbes magazine that brags about being a mouthpiece of the capitalist class, entertaining the question of reparations. They have to take the question of reparations because the crisis of the social system, because more and more people are obviously opposed to this rotten social system, and African people everywhere are demanding more than what has been offered, more than what an Obama presidency could provide, more than what these liberals who are running around here now needing the black vote, not because they love black people, but because they're in a contest with another sector of white power that has locked down the white vote. The white nationalism is something that is running rampant all around the world, not just in the United States. And so Trump has taken command of the white nationalist sentiments inside the United States. And because they pretend to have a democratic process where different sectors of the ruling class can wage this nonviolent struggle with each other for control of the state, that means they need the approval of sectors of the population immediately in order to take control of the state, the FBI, the CIA, the military, the courtroom, the systems that will protect their interests, their capitalist interests, because Trump has locked down the white nationalist vote and the sentiments of white people in this country. Another sector of the bourgeoisie contesting for the same imperialist power now has to be able to get that support from black people, from other people who are not a part of this lockdown white nationalist thing that Trump has cemented right now. That Trump has cemented. Of course, you have some of the liberals who will come around to the question of reparations eventually, who are also fighting for the white nationalist vote, like Bernie Sanders, who up to now has been unable to unite with the reparations demand. He'll be pushed to that question, but he's fighting for the white vote too. And Trump and he had the most exciting political expressions during the electoral process of the last presidential season. This time, Trump has the white vote essentially locked down, and now those who need the white vote are coming and raising up the question of reparations. But not because they want to repair the damage, because they can't repair the damage as long as the same social system that has sucked the life out of black people and set up instruments and institutions to guarantee that this continues to happen, that system, it would still be in place according to what any of them, Elizabeth Warren or any of the others who are now suddenly discovered that we need reparations. How is it that all of a sudden they discovered that? How is it that you could have this so-called bill in Congress for more than 40 years just to examine the question of reparations and not even get it out of committee for more than 40 years, and then suddenly there's this great epiphany that now they want to talk about reparations. Elizabeth Warren wants to talk about reparations. And there are various others. Obama came out against reparations. He was the chief Democratic Party leader. He was against reparations. Now all of a sudden they want to have that discussion. What's happened? And what's happened is a contest between white power, not between us and the system. And our contest is with the whole system. And so we say reparations is what we have to fight for. But in order to do that, you have to have a revolutionary perspective. And the ones who are talking about reparations, for the most part, do not have a revolutionary perspective. And how do I know? I know this because having a revolutionary perspective means that you have to have an instrument through which the revolution can be led, through which political power can be conquered. Revolution is not just something that you wish upon. It's made by human beings who have created organizations and who have developed a revolutionary political theory about how this can be achieved, and who is committed to a future for the liberation of African and under the leadership of the working class in alliance with all the oppressed peoples around the world. To do that, you have to have a revolutionary organization. This is the road to revolution. I don't care how nice somebody looks. I don't care how colorful they are on TV. The fact is, or in the congressional debates, the question is, do they have a revolutionary program? And if they have a revolutionary program, is that reflected in the material existence of a revolutionary organization that will provide leadership for the critical sector of the population that's necessary to make the revolution? That is the African working class. Do they have these things? Do they have a revolutionary theory? Do they explain the existence of everything, not just Trump, not just the Republican Party, but the existence of the whole social system as something that has come about as a consequence of slavery and colonialism? Do they do that? Do they say that capitalism and the social system is the enemy, and in order to take care of capitalism, then we have to build a revolutionary organization, because you can't just wish socialism into existence. If socialism is going to occur, And socialism is a social system that contends with capitalism, which is another social system. It is a social system that has drones, that has NATO, that has military forces that kills and destroy people. So if you're going to have socialism, you're going to have revolution. If you're going to have revolution, you're going to have revolutionary organization that is informed, guided by a advanced revolutionary theory. So we believe in reparations. But when reparations, and so we support all the struggles, all the efforts, go to Congress, go all of these places and demand reparations. Make the reparations demand permeate everything. Want it to be talked about in grocery stores and laundromats. We want reparations to be talked about in beauty parlors and barbershops. Every place we want it to be out there. And then once it grips the masses, we will never have to worry about what Congress says or what any judge, any place says, because the people will begin to take back what belongs to us. And this is what we mean when we say that reparations is a function of the revolution, because it is the demand that can mobilize the masses of the people as long as the people are not trapped by this attempt to hijack it by these politicians and these other people who will place constraints on it and tell us, whoa, look, it's wonderful. The Congress is now talking about reparations. This is wonderful because a movie star is now talking about reparations. Wow, that's all we need, Congress and movie stars, to talk about reparations. That's going to feed the mass of the people. That's what we're supposed to believe. We don't. So anyway, I really said that as a preliminary to get into this discussion that we're having, because we're talking about revolution and not just about being good on social media and getting likes and that kind of thing. And so we're starting with the first chapter in the political report to the 6th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And this is a political report made by a revolutionary to a revolutionary organization, to people who have come together for the purpose of overturning this relationship that we have with white power, with the existing social system, regardless of who is at its helm. And so we're starting here on what is actually page 23 in the first chapter. Challenging the Time Warp is the title of this chapter. So, and I want to say that we are going to have discussions about reparations. This was not it, you know. And we're going to have discussions about socialism. This was not it. And we're going to have discussions about revolution. This was not it, this overview. But part of what we're doing here with the political reports, and every political report, is deepening this discussion and bringing revolution and socialism and organization and theory to the people through you, certainly members of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement. And it is a statement that's being made because right now what you have is when the oppressor begins to appear to embrace your ideas, you can become too comfortable. The oppressor, you seem, wow, we've done it. We've got, now the Congress is talking about, when the oppressor begins to embrace your ideas, in many cases it can neutralize you if you're not clear. And this is what we are continuously doing, reinforming and bringing clarity to our people. And because we recognize that in addition to everything else, we are involved in the struggle for national liberation. As I say, all the black people are oppressed by the state, by the imperialist state. And in the United States, of course, that is how the imperialist state is characterized. It's called something else in France. It's called something else in different parts of Africa, where the imperialist state is extended to the continent of Africa and much of the world where it dominates us, and it uses instruments like NATO and the United Nations and all these other instruments as a means by which they can control us, just like the police department does in Philadelphia, right? So in the United States. So the thing is that, you know, we must remember, those of us in the party, those of us who are part of the Uhuru movement, those of us who are committed to this revolutionary transformation, that the social system itself is rotten. It cannot provide relief. And when the moment you see it begin to appear to make concessions It is precisely because for some reason or another it has been weakened and it feels like it can solve its problem by absorbing the energy or the aspirations of the masses and repackaging the energy and aspirations of the masses and putting it back to the people and say, this is your idea. In St. Petersburg, Florida, for example, in the African community struggle for a long time, in the community was, say, to get a supermarket. It needed a supermarket because the supermarkets and grocery stores that we had been pushed out by different policies of the city government. And so we needed an African supermarket. And so what happened was the government took some African property and then got a major corporation to establish a supermarket in the African community. And so they say, now you got a supermarket. And the only thing, of course, they did was facilitate the ability of the white-owned corporation to more easily get our money because we were closer to it. They did nothing to actually change the circumstances and conditions. So be careful what you ask for, because the U.S. Congress and the Supreme Court, they will offer certain things. They will try to buy their way out of it. They will try to buy silence from the masses of people. They will buy Negro leaders who will tell you it's all right now because boss is going to solve this problem for us. And we think when we see that happening, we know that we are in an advantageous place. So we want all of them to say yes, 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 reparations. We want them to, we want an unanimous assumption by the entire body politic and everybody that African people are owed reparations from what has been taken from us. Then we'll do the rest. The masses will do the rest. That's our responsibility. So yes, go to Congress, go to the movies, go to all these other places and say reparations, reparations, reparations. You wouldn't say it when we first brought it out. You call us a lunatic fringe when we first started talking about it, but go and do that now. Then it's up to us. That's why we have to have revolutionary organization. That's why you, members of the party, you, people who are part of the Uhuru movement, now must escalate this process of building reparations movement on the ground, not in the Congress, on the ground, not in the court, on the ground, in the communities where people are impoverished and harassed and dealt with in the worst kinds of way every day. And don't worry about it because there's nobody going to be out there but you and the police. Because the rest of the pretenders don't believe in the power of the African working class. We never find them in these locations where we are, but we will be there all the time. We will build the army from the ground up that will overturn the social system, because really reparations is going to be associated with trials. The people come to power and a whole bunch of forces going to go on trial, and it's going to be on trial by the African working class. So everybody ought to be getting your game together. Anyway, the extraordinary journey of the African People's Socialist Party began nearly 42 years ago. This is written for Congress that happened in 2013 in St. Petersburg, Florida. It is fitting that this journey, celebrated with our party's 6th Congress, was launched during the process of building the first African Liberation Day mobilization in Washington, D.C., held on May 27, 1972. Throughout our history, we have often emphasized the significance of the African People's Socialist Party. But today, we are clear that at no time has the existence of our party been more important and urgently needed than it is now. Not only is building the party a crucial task of our organization, it is also the fundamental task of the African Revolution as a whole at this critical historical juncture. Our party was begun by a mere handful of us at a time when U.S. imperialism was gloating about its victory over many of the forces of liberation that defined the spirit of the 1950s and 60s, when revolution was the main trend in the whole world, including inside the borders of the U.S. The African People's Socialist Party was founded in the wake of the crushing military defeat of the African Revolution in Africa, within the U.S. and worldwide. It was a period when the U.S. government was confident its years-long efforts to wipe out our struggle for liberation had been successful. The U.S. government's bloody wave of political repression in the 1960s left some of our most outstanding leaders imprisoned, overthrown, or murdered. As a result, our movement's most significant organizations were enfeebled or destroyed. Nevertheless, even as an era of struggle was being brutally brought to a close and the dreams of freedom and happiness of millions of our people were being subordinated to the whims of imperialism, another era was being born with the founding of our party. This era is now fully upon us. We have defined this era as the final offensive against imperialism. We have defined this era as the final offensive against imperialism. Although a final offensive is generally considered to be the strategic culmination of a military engagement, we are speaking here of the final offensive in historical terms. We are talking about the fact that current conditions have resulted in the emergence of oppressed peoples as the determinant social force, actively reversing the verdict of an imperialism built on our backs. And we say, this is important, that we are talking about the fact that the current conditions have resulted in the emergence of oppressed peoples as the determinant social force, actively reversing the verdict of an imperialism built on our backs. Oppressed peoples. I mean, this is why you see permanent warfare all around the world. The oppressed peoples are in motion. They're determined not to live like this anymore, not to live under the boot of white power or any other kind of imperial power. The tables have turned, and the U.S. is now attempting to stave off the growing global threats to imperialism as it currently exists, desperately fighting to regain its preeminence in the tottering imperialist system. Today, there is an uneasy equilibrium between the past and the future, and much anxiety abounds throughout the world. Every individual, every social force that perceived its future attached to the existing imperialist social system is experiencing severe distress. And this is something that gives us the ability to explain Brexit, this thing that's happening within the so-called European Union. It helps us to explain what we see with the Catalan movement in Spain, where a sect is trying to break free from Spain, the contest between Italy and France that seems to be exacerbating, even the neo-colonial system throughout the continent of Africa. And also it makes itself manifest in persons, in human beings, who now find themselves being in a situation where the social system is under assault, under attack by the revolutionary forces of the world. And all of these forces are experiencing distress because of the struggles of the peoples to take back our resources, and especially because of an identifiable force such as the African People's Socialist Party that's leading much of this revolutionary project. So it's something that we experience. So we see it happening in countries and alliances between international relationships and stuff like that. We see it happening between organizations and within organizations. Within organizations, there are forces who come into organizations pretending to be revolutionaries and all the like, until the crisis deepens and the movement begins to take us to a place that challenges the existing social system. Then they begin to reveal what side they really are on. This is how the system works. It's not just some abstract thing out there, but it permeates the ranks of our own movement, our families, and everything else. With the initiation of the Sixth Congress, our party stands on the heights established by our 41-year history of struggle. This is the metaphorical mountaintop from which we can see a future of our Africa and our people liberated and united, propelling all oppressed humanity, all the workers and toiling masses of the world into a future of peace, prosperity, and eternal social justice. This is who we are. It's not just about getting a body camera. It's not just about trying to find some temporary peace in this social system. We're talking about creating a new world where human beings can live differently. We don't have to live like this. This is the ambition of the African People's Socialist Party. This is the goal of African internationalism. This is the thing that locks us into this project that makes it impossible for us to be diverted by some opportunist program that seems to solve some small problem or some temporary problem, or even to get some reparations that might get us a new car, or to have our teeth fixed, as one great leader said in the 1980s. This is a new world that we are creating, that we must create, because this world is a world that was created off the backs of our oppression and our enslavement and the enslavement of the peoples around the world. This has to go. And we have decided that we're going to make it go. That's what it is to be a member of the African People's Socialist Party, to be committed to the discipline that's necessary to make it happen, to become a professional revolutionary that is capable of withstanding criticism and engaging in self-criticism and doing whatever is necessary to solve the problem, to win the liberation and freedom of our people and the peoples of the world, and to change this rotten social system, to push it out of existence. We know that the imperialist ideologues, philosophers, politicians, and economists alike have no answers to the pressing issues of our times. They don't. They don't. And you find this not only just like with people who are fighting against Donald Trump inside the Democratic Party, but you find this with many people who call themselves militants and suggest kind of sort of that they are revolutionary, because they have no discussion that a projection that takes them beyond the existing kind of electoral process that they're engaged in. The electoral process is the end all. It is not the electoral process that's used for the purpose, as the African People's Socialist Party does use the electoral process, of advancing the revolutionary capture of political power. It's not that. And when we say the revolutionary capture of political power, you can't capture political power in a revolutionary fashion without destroying the power of the oppressor. And that's who we are. So they have no answers. Every day there's a new lamentation by one or another thinking representative of the white ruling class that the latest proffered solution to imperialism's unending crisis has proved to be illusory. At the same time, the defeat of our movement of the 1960s has resulted in more than 2 generations of Africans with no revolutionary practice or points of reference that can be relied on for direction. As the sole force, as the only force that has kept alive the revolutionary aims of the African liberation movement over this period, it has always been up to the party to lead the way forward out of the morass of defeat. Many militants are stuck in a time war. They are locked in the period of our military defeat, when many political and ideological contradictions thrust upon us by the African Revolution were left unresolved. That era is now nearly a half-century behind us. We learned from Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party, for example, but we do so while recognizing that we must build for the present and future off the platform they provided us from the past. Too often attempts are being made to base struggle on what others did in the 1960s, as opposed to what is needed to advance the struggle of African workers and the African nation today. To do this is to emulate imperialism, imperialists who are always unsuccessful, trapped in the past because they are fighting the last war. Since the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s, the masses of the people have been sidelined, pushed out of political life. This is part of what we resolve when we bring people, the masses, into the discussion around reparations. What passes for struggle is relegated most often to single-issue activism that is nothing but an appendage to social media militancy or liberal and other bourgeois schemes. And that's what it has to be. I mean, just single-issue activism, regardless of the intent of the people who are involved in it. These issues come from someplace. Issues just don't happen. If you're active around a particular issue, it's because of the nature of the social system itself. Are you saying that the social system is wonderful, except that they shoot black people every now and then in the streets? The problem is single-issue activism can only be something that you can, put your video clips on and get a lot of likes and make it go viral, or you can function as some appendage to some liberal bourgeois scheme. The significance of our party lies in the fact that we have never surrendered or deviated from the path of the same African revolution that motivated the imperialist white power attacks of the 20th century. We continue to lead despite the general setbacks suffered by our movement as a whole. We are the only organization that correctly analyzed the fact that the black revolution of the 60s was defeated by imperialist counterinsurgency, a military attack intended to keep our people and our movement from ever rising up again. We are the only organization. You will not even find this in any discussion that any other so-called revolutionary organization put forth around what happened to the black revolution of the 1960s. They don't talk about counterinsurgency or anything to that effect. You have really adult-minded kinds of explanations, but we are the only organization that recognizes the role of counterinsurgency. Our party's summation of this defeat has informed our work and our mission to complete the black revolution instead of settling for the limitations of the present. And this is what many forces have done. They settle for the limitations of the present. This has been a necessary recognition that has prevented us from confusing events subsequent to the defeat of our revolution with events of our actual revolutionary movement that shook imperialism to its foundation. So if you don't know the African Revolution was defeated by counterinsurgency, if you don't know that happened, you make the error of seeing this ongoing continuum of a social movement that would make a Barack Obama an heir to Malcolm X, an heir to the Black Panther Party, an heir to Jomo and the Black Revolution. And he is not an heir to that. They defeated the revolution. That's the basis of Obama. That's the basis of most of the black politicians and office holders you see today come about as a consequence of the defeat of the black revolution. That's the basis even of the Congress talking about reparations and black Democrats talking and other Democrats talking about socialism today. Because this movement shook this country to its foundation. The African Revolution was the critical movement in this country that shook it to its foundation, that gave rise to the white women's movement, the white homosexual movement, to most of what we saw happening that we characterize as progressive came in the wake and as a response of the African Revolution of the 1960s. This recognition is what helped us to understand that much of what has transpired since then in the name of the Black Revolution has only been merely the activities of the African petty bourgeoisie functioning to hijack the consciousness of the masses of our people. This false revolution or liberation advanced by the colonized petty bourgeoisie was addressed in our book, Israelitu e Africa, Africa is Our Land, which was the political report to our third party Congress held in 1990. We made it clear that the liberation of the petty bourgeoisie can never meet the needs and aspirations of the colonized working class. And that's really important. The liberation of the petty bourgeoisie can never meet the needs and aspirations of the colonized working class. That's why when we talk about issues like reparations and socialism, you have to go to the essential questions. In fact, the working class is key to the whole question, first of all, of socialist revolution. You can't have socialism without workers being in power. It's absolutely impossible. It's a fantasy. It's what has been characterized in the past as utopian socialism, where you change the minds of the oppressors and the capitalists that might make them give you $15 an hour over a period of years. That's no socialism. That's utopian socialism at best. And at worst, it's simply chicanery. It's simply smoke and mirrors at worst. So we say that these words remain relevant. This is a quote from the 1990 Yeshitela Africa political report to our Congress, Third Congress. We say that the national liberation of the aspiring black petty bourgeoisie, and you know, that's what, you know, we talk about opportunism. That's what permeates everything today. Even the so-called feminist movement, anti-patriarchy movement, and I hear some of these persons who call themselves revolutionaries defining the contradiction as racism and patriarchy and capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is a certain kind of pop theory, a pop ideology. It's just take what's trending at the moment. That's what it is. It's trending ideology. So what is trending at the moment, you know, you throw it out as what that's no analysis. That's no real interpretation of the reality that we are confronted with. So anyway, I'm raising this because there are people who will settle for solutions against these kinds of contradictions and call it revolutionary. But what we're saying here, and I'm quoting from the Yeshitela Africa from our Third Congress, the national liberation of the aspiring black petty bourgeoisie is a liberation from the limitations of its development into a full-blown bourgeoisie. Limitations which are imposed on it by domestic colonialism, the imperialists ruled by foreign gangsters. Those are limitations. So the limitations of black women to, just like the limitation of white women to become one with the big shots, the bosses, to have the same kind of rights under imperialism as white men, which is also a struggle against the patriarchy. That's the limitations that they will fight for, but overturn the entire rotten system upon which the so-called patriarchy they pretend to hate, and the white man domination that they pretend to hate, overturning that and putting our future and our fate in the hands of the African working class is not something they are prepared to do. That's what we are talking about. Within this concept of national liberation is a germ of a future continuing exploitation of the African working class by a black bourgeoisie that has been liberated from the national oppression which prevented the emergence of a free, imperialist black boss. Such a national liberation is not in the interest of the colonized African working class. The national liberation of the working class is a liberation which will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation. The national liberation of the working class is a liberation which will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation. And it's really important for us to say this because the petty bourgeoisie cannot fight for the interests of the African working class as a social force, as a class. It will betray the interests of the working class. The working class is where the power has to be located. And the working class, the liberation of the working class will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation. And you can have forms of oppression and exploitation that will embrace homosexuals, heterosexuals, men, women. All of them can participate in oppression and exploitation. But the national liberation of the working class will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation against all sectors of the class and the nation except for the bourgeoisie, which is going to have to be severely punished and is going to have to be oppressed and not be able to ever have power as a social force again. Our objective is the eradication of class domination, class rule, and certainly that starts with the destruction of the petty bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie as social forces, as classes. The national liberation of the domestically colonized African working class is not only interested in removing the oppression of foreign rule, it is also, when they say foreign, I mean, if you're in the United States, or if you in England, or if you're in France or someplace else, clearly we want the French, the British, and the United States white people to stop messing with us, because that's what we're talking about. But we say we're not only interested in removing the oppression of foreign rule, it is also interested in destroying the class rule which exploits the workers and toiling masses of all countries where the capitalist system prevails. The national liberation of the working class is explicitly anti-capitalist and consciously a part of the worldwide socialist movement. That's the national liberation. So the end of that quote. Written nearly a quarter of a century ago, this is a position from which we have never retreated. This is the position that informs how we lead today and by which we measure the state of our movement at any given time. Throughout our entire history, all of our work has been designed to solve the problems of the revolution, not to find a way to get along within the circumstances provided us by our imperialist enemies and their servile lackeys in our midst. Our commitment to continue to forge ahead with the African Revolution has not been without consequences, however. From the party's beginning in 1972, we worked to rebuild our entire movement with various campaigns, including attempts to give African Liberation Day a revolutionary character. From its very inception, as our party aimed to unite the anti-colonial tendency, the primary target of the U.S. counterinsurgency of the 1960s, and from its very inception, as our party aimed to unite the anti-colonial tendencies, the primary target of the U.S. counterinsurgency of the 1960s, around a collective movement to liberate Africans imprisoned in the U.S. colonial prison system, we had to combat sundry political opponents that were incapable of venturing beyond the quagmire of defeat. In the 1980s, we were attacked for correctly identifying the presidential campaign of Jesse Jackson as a diversionary move to draw the African masses back into the safe embrace of the imperialist Democratic Party, instead of into the ranks of their own independent revolutionary organization. The party stood alone, as most of the so-called revolutionary organizations of the time attempted to build themselves on the Jackson presidential campaign coattails. Today, more and more people are capable of recognizing we had problems then, and even today when we make certain kinds of criticisms, because they say, well, something's got to work, something's got to be okay, everything can't be bad. And what we're saying is everything is not bad, but it's the responsibility to have a revolutionary party that can seize power. That we don't concede power to the African petty bourgeoisie, even if we find ourselves working with them. Under certain circumstances, the struggle cannot concede power to them. You can't build a future based on what the African petty bourgeoisie is going to do. History has told us over and over again that the African petty bourgeoisie will betray the revolution. It always has, always will betray the revolution. So the point is not that everything is always bad. What is good is revolutionary organization that can go into relationships or come out of relationships on its own terms. It's not something that's locked into some death-like embrace with a neo-colonial or petty bourgeois force that has no interest, that cannot possibly take us to revolutionary conclusions. That's why some would-be revolutionaries even characterize us as the CIA, because during the Jesse Jackson campaign, we made a poster of Jesse Jackson and George Wallace, both members of the Democratic Party, Wallace being notorious for the violence that, as governor of Alabama, that he had initiated against African people, and then attempted to make something happen throughout the United States when he ran for president. And so Jackson is in an embrace with this guy. We put a picture up showing this, and we are the CIA. Jackson is all right, but we are the CIA. And this is coming from so-called revolutionaries, some-called communists, who said that we are the CIA because we won't allow people to see Jesse Jackson and George Wallace as separate kind of entities, when in fact they were locked in an embrace. They were, not only were they both in the Democratic Party, but the fact is they were part of a single strategic thrust by the Democratic Party, by the bourgeoisie, I should say. Today, more and more people are capable of recognizing the complicity of the African National Congress, if not Nelson Mandela, in the attempt to rescue imperialist interests in South Africa. More than 30 years ago, however, much more than 30 years ago now, in the 1970s and 80s, the African People's Socialist Party stood alone in correctly identifying and struggling against the ANC as the mass organization of the opportunist, nearly lily-white Communist Party of South Africa, and as petty bourgeois neo-colonialists in waiting. We were the only organization that did it. Most people have forgotten that the fact that at one time the Communist Party of South Africa had the slogan, "Workers unite to keep South Africa white." Most people have forgotten that the ANC at best was just some kind of mass organization fighting for some kind of democratic change within the South African social system dominated by white power. And it was the Communist Party of South Africa, the white Communist Party, or almost white Communist Party. And yes, I know they produced one or two Africans who became leaders and who are still proclaimed by many as great revolutionaries who, had they lived, would have made a big difference. But even that's fanciful. We have not changed. Our party, as the advanced detachment of the African working class, continues to uphold the responsibility to show the way forward, especially when the way forward is murkiest. This is why we were first out of the gate to criticize Barack Hussein Obama, the current most insidious face of U.S. imperialism. It is understandable that the masses of Africans worldwide would grasp at the slightest perceived chance of advancing from the crucible of colonial hell by embracing Obama's imperialist presidency. From liberal Democrats to black nationalists and Marxists, so-called African leaders were delirious in their salivating embrace of Obama. This opportunism kept in front of us the requirement of the party, of the African working class, to lead at all times. So must we lead today. At this moment, this is the meaning of all our work. This is why we organized the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, INPDUM, in 1991 as one of our organizational and political strategies to lead. It is the primary organization we have created to bring the masses back into active, independent political life. INPDUM represents our recognition that a revolutionary period is characterized not by Negroes running for president or any political office for that matter, but by the masses fully participating in political life on their own terms and under the leadership and influence of their own revolutionary party. This does not mean that we confuse the party with the masses. We are not the masses. We are the advanced detachment, the general staff of the African working class. We do not bury or liquidate the party among the masses. We lead always. I want to say this again because it's even relevant to a discussion we were having yesterday within the African Socialist International about the responsibility of the party to lead all the time. So we are not the masses. We are the advanced detachment, the general staff of the African working class. We do not bury or liquidate the party among the masses. We lead always. Sometimes our positions are unpopular in the short term, even among the masses, only to be vindicated as events unfold to reveal a truth that was obscured by the faulty analysis of the prevailing common perception. On such occasions, we must move in opposition to the direction the masses are attempting to go. Otherwise, what is the meaning of leadership? When a representative of our party and movement stood up in an Obama campaign meeting in St. Petersburg, Florida in August 2008, our challenge to Obama met a fierce, solid wall of vocal rejection and opposition from the African masses themselves. Even some members of our movement and party fell under the sway of liberal imperialism after being intimidated by the delirious mass response to the Obama candidacy and presidency. It was our responsibility to provide leadership around the question. Otherwise, the people would have been left absolutely defenseless in the face of this most insidious imperialist attack. Whatever the initial negative response of the masses, our continued leadership among the people and the ruthless policies of U.S. imperialism in crisis with Obama at its helm will ultimately contribute to the ability of the people to rise up against imperialism from a stronger position than before. The tradition of organized, practical resistance that characterized the last magnificent period of struggle in the 1960s has been relegated to a past only conjured up for the purpose of abstract celebrations of poorly recorded, seldom correctly analyzed and understood, now long gone glories. Aside from the leadership of the party, what remains of the African liberation movement has succumbed to the political and ideological stagnation that often follows the defeat of a revolution. When repression sets in and crushes the revolutionary trajectory, what is left is often a caricature of revolution, simple careerism on the part of those happily occupying space in the movement without an agenda for the revolutionary capture of power. When repression sets in and crushes the revolutionary trajectory, what is left is often a caricature of revolution, a simple careerism on the part of those happily occupying spaces in the movement without an agenda for the revolutionary capture of power. The revolutionary essence has been removed or diluted to meet the legal requirements of the day. Many would-be revolutionaries have learned to speak in this new language of non-struggle struggle and muted revolution. This has become a fundamental weakness, making it difficult to recognize, respond to, and participate in genuine revolutionary politics. We of the African People's Socialist Party are confident that we know the way forward. Our organizational capacity is growing, and we are capable of answering the questions confounding both the imperialist ruling class and the revolutionaries struggling to advance during this imperialist crisis. The 6th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party is occurring at a time that the presence of our party is sorely needed by Africans and the laboring masses across the globe. It is a time when the world seems to be adrift and in turmoil, unleashed from its political, ideological, and economic moorings. The 2010 5th Congress of our party, with its slogan, "One People, One Party, One Destiny," laid a solid foundation for this period, focusing on organization and capacity building. Our last Congress has guided our subsequent work to this point and gives us the confidence with which we enter our 6th Congress and this historical moment. Following the days of democratic discussions and resolutions at the 5th Party Congress, we temporarily brought all party organizations and offices under the direct leadership of the office of the chairman through the creation of the One People, One Party, One Destiny Committee. With this ad hoc committee, we initiated a party and movement-wide campaign under the same title that created protocols for the implementations of the Fifth Congress resolutions and mandates for rapid recruitment and organization building in this ripe and urgent period of imperialist crisis. As a result, our party today is one of the fastest growing, most effective revolutionary organizations in the world. We are grounded in England, as well as in several cities in Germany, France, Sweden, and Belgium in Europe. We're actively working in West Africa, particularly in Sierra Leone, and we have growing ideological and political influence and bases in northern, southern, and eastern Africa. Party organizers are active in the Bahamas, in the Caribbean, and we are growing within the U.S. with political and ideological influence among Africans and others in Canada. The growth of our party will contribute to the definition of revolution during this period. The growth of our party will contribute to the definition of revolution during this period. For the past 30 years, with the failure of the Chinese and Soviet Marxist models, it has been the specter of Islam that by default unites millions of oppressed in general opposition to imperialism. This is because Islam is most concentrated in the areas of the world where impoverished masses suffer from imperialist domination that, since the time of the so-called Christian holy wars or crusades of the Middle Ages, has been understood and defined in religious terms. Now, through the party's increasingly global presence and growth, our theory of African internationalism gives us the opportunity to provide scientific, materialist-based leadership to the African Revolution and the oppressed peoples everywhere. The existence and work of the African People's Socialist Party and all that we do stemming from our Sixth Congress spell death to imperialism, something we can say with sublime confidence. Uhuru. So what I want to do is end it here, and I won't go into the second chapter. I think that this will give us much more time for discussion, and we don't have to rush it, by trying to cram much of the second chapter into this particular discussion. And so with the next session, we can deal with the second chapter. Somebody can let the comrade know, please. So that's what I want to do, and I would like for everybody to, hopefully you're prepared to go into this discussion, and notes have been taken, and so that to make the discussion go even better, and hopefully there will be time to elaborate on the kinds of issues that people may want to talk about. I ended this a bit earlier than normal. Usually I ended a bit later than necessary, but this should give us more time. And right now, the comrade who leads this process has stepped out, and we're going to bring her into this, right back into this discussion, so that we can get to your participation. So don't go anywhere, because we really want to dig in and deal with every question. I'm hoping that you have a lot of questions that you want to talk about. Can we begin? Is there a way we can begin? So I understand that we have some questions already. Do you want to go ahead and say what we're doing?
Yeah, Dan Tournay says, Uhuru Chairman, yesterday I was at a prison abolition
So,
where the chair of the New African Black Panther Party spoke. Some of his
Say that again. There was who? Diane Tornay? Was that something where?
In a prison abolition conference, and she saw the chair of the new African Black Panther Party speak. His words sounded a lot like yours. Can you distinguish? Can you say what the difference is between the two groups?
Well, I don't know what the difference are. I know that I don't know if people heard your question, comrade. People who are online heard your question.
Uhuru Chairman. So Diane Tornay says, Uhuru Chairman, yesterday I was at a prison abolition conference where the chair of the new African Black Panther Party spoke. Some of his words closely resemble yours. Could you comment on the political difference between the APSP and their group?
I don't know really anything much about the New African Black Panther Party, or the, is that how they characterize them? I've seen them online, and I'm kind of familiar indirectly with the brother who heads the organization, but I can only say is that it sounds a lot, if it sounds a lot like us, it's just because African internationalism is growing as a philosophy, is growing in influence throughout the liberation movement. It would be helpful if forces would indicate where the philosophy comes from, because that would be helpful. Most instances, what we hear is a form of a revisionism, that people take the line and bend it and distort it to meet some other kinds of class interests and aspirations other than that of the African working class. So I don't know enough about that organization to say the difference in our organizations. I do know that this is someone who has, perhaps is even in this study, has participated with some of the studies that we've done, and I think it's just an example of how influential African internationalism is becoming. And I think that's important because one of the problems that we had to solve in the 1960s that resulted in our initiating fierce struggle within the African liberation movement is the poverty of philosophy, the real ideological weakness of the African liberation movement. And we took this on with a vengeance and fought around those questions and fought various tendencies inside the African liberation movement, demanding a scientific approach and demanding recognition of the revolutionary significance of the African working class. We fought many organizations and tendencies at that time. And so it was part of the process of shaping African internationalism that we engaged in these struggles. So today there is a philosophy, and African internationalism is it. There's no way you can get around that, and some people won't call themselves African internationalism, they just use African internationalism terms, and some people are not African internationalists, though they use African internationalist terms, and they are revisionists. They take the theory and revise it to serve some other class interest. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Yeah, I appreciate that. I also want to salute and appreciate the study, especially the part you mentioned earlier about if your oppressor embraces your ideas, it can neutralize you. Yeah. I thought that was very powerful.
Well, the oppressor has the power, you see, and it wants to neutralize you. That's the intent of the oppressor doing it. I mean, I spoke in Oxford. I took that debate in Oxford on January 24th, and some pretty smart African commentators would say something like, why do you want to speak to this white people? And it was supposed to be something that was a detraction from the fact that Malcolm and I spoke at Oxford. But I spoke at Oxford because it was a really important thing because of the influence, the ideological, theoretical, intellectual influence from Oxford and how that was spread throughout the world, and virtually every African intellectual and what have you has some kind of appreciation for the African theory African philosophy, for the most part, is not even respected. It's not even respected by Africans, not respected by anybody. So at the point where Oxford, which is the premier institution of the bourgeoisie, the international bourgeoisie, the intellectual, the place where, we talked about as being the pinnacle of bourgeois academics, at the point that they invite me to come and speak, it means that they see that there is a contending philosophy that is out there. And this contending philosophy, a philosophy that contends with the worldview of the bourgeoisie, of the international bourgeoisie, a philosophy that contends with it is arising, that it is influencing. And they say this, and they identified African internationalism in the letter they sent, that the contribution made to African internationalism, to socialism, etc., that's why they wanted me there. So I went there because I knew going there was going to get me into audiences within the African world that I never would have had before. And going to Oxford resulted in more than 2 million people having heard that 10-minute presentation that I made in Oxford. 2 million, mostly Africans from around the world, not only heard that, but many of them coming to our party and to our movement and under our influence. And I have an entirely different view of the world as a consequence of having gone there. So this is an important development for the African liberation movement that we were criticizing very severely in the 1980s and 90s for its dearth, for the absence or lack of theory, science in the process. And now this is where we find, occurring. So it's really important. And African internationalism is important. And so I'm glad that it's being embraced by everybody who will embrace it, because it offers a worldview that predicts the defeat of imperialism, the victory of the African Revolution, and liberation for Africans and oppressed peoples around the world. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. So just to say that we have viewers from all over, from Nairobi, Kenya, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, San Diego, California, Rotterdam, Netherlands, Huntsville, Alabama, Houston, Texas.
Rotterdam and Netherlands?
Rotterdam,
Okay.
Netherlands,
Uhuru.
yeah. Uhuru. Huntsville, Alabama, Houston, Texas, Chicago, Illinois, St. Louis, Missouri, St. Kitts in the West Indies, Oakland, California, Fort Myers, Florida, Azania, Boston, Massachusetts, South Africa, Boston, Massachusetts, Clearwater, Florida, the Gambia, Louisville, Kentucky, London,
Gambia, West Africa.
Gambia, West Africa,
Louisville.
Kentucky, London, UK, and Lagos.
What? Lagos.
Lagos,
Yeah,
Nigeria.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So these are people who are watching all over. And we have a comment that asks, can the chairman comment on Sudan? Is there any socialist aspect to the people's movement, and who is backing the military oppressors?
Yeah, Sudan is an extremely nasty situation. I think over the last couple of days, hundreds, or at least 100, and probably more Africans were gunned down by the Sudanese military. You had a situation where masses discontent, mass demonstrations forced the resignation of Omar al-Bashir, who had been in power there for a long time, and who himself was a former military person who came to power, if I'm not mistaken, through a coup. And he has been a dominant force, politically there for a long time. When the masses now begin to protest, and you see this uprising, then they did the same thing in Sudan that they did, or they're trying to do, that they did in Egypt. Because many people are so hated in Egypt. The police, after they pushed Mubarak out of power in Egypt, then the police became this extremely repressive entity. And the people hated the police, obviously, because they were so oppressive. And then the military stepped in, stopped what the police was doing. So the people embraced the military. Now, this is the same military that the United States government had been giving billions of dollars to every year, And Mubarak himself was a general in that military who received the money from the United States government for the purpose of repressing our people in Egypt. But because people didn't understand the question of the state and didn't understand that it wasn't a matter of Mubarak, the person, but he represented an institutionalized presence of imperialism that dominated our people, so they celebrated and actually embraced the army, the same army that Mubarak had used to repress them all these years. And then, of course, under Sisi, who was the general who assumed power, the repression, if it is possible, became even greater. I mean, masses of people were killed for demonstrating, just like what's happening now in Sudan, when they thought that some respite. And in Sudan, they had made some kind of agreement with the military, that they had the agreement between the protesters, if you will, and the military, that at some juncture, and the difference now was how long it was going to take. There was going to be some kind of return to civilian rule. There was going to be a caretaker organization or group put in power until this changed. But that was not likely because, again, we still have the state, and it's still the imperial state. The people have not broken the state. The state had to be broken, had to be wiped out. And under Bashir, thousands of Sudanese soldiers were employed on a regular basis to actually fight and kill people in Yemen. And they received, like, I think, $1,000 for every soldier who went and helped kill people in Yemen. And this is indirectly U.S. control because it's the Saudis and one of the other so-called Arab regimes there that's funding this process. So they get rid of Bashir, but the people still have no power. And the military, they have this, and it was the petty bourgeoisie who led this thing. It was so-called, I forgot how we usually characterize these people who are like doctors and teachers, professionals, who like led this whole movement of opposition and what have you. It wasn't a worker-based thing, and the working class has no organization of its own or anything like that, or was not obvious in terms of contesting for power. So you had this thing where the protesters, as they were characterized, meeting and dealing with the military, with the generals. The general said, okay, we'll give up some power over a little period of time. In fact, the first general that they put in place, the protesters said, no, we don't like that general. And so then they put another general in place, and this is the consequence. So the people have no power, and revolution is going to be the only thing that's going to make that's going to make any change. So one, revolution has to happen in Sudan, and it has to be a part of consciousness that it would be simply the Sudanese front of the African Revolution. It gives the African Revolution a foot there. That means that we need to have the African Socialist International grounded in Sudan, where revolution can, under the leadership of the African working class in the form of the African People's Socialist Party, can make the difference. Right now, that's not the case. And so it's a rocky road ahead in Sudan. And, but we know that every time this kind of thing happens, the people get that experience under their belt, and next time out, they are more prone, more likely, more capable of requiring a greater response to repression and struggle than what we've seen both in Egypt and now in Sudan, and even in Algeria, where a similar situation has developed. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. And we also have people tuning in from Germany and Zambia. So another question is from Ikemba from Philly. It says, Uhuru, what are some of the theoretical differences and similarities between the original Black Panther Party and APSP? Was Huey Newton evolving by developing the theory of, I think it was, international communalism?
No, communalism. No, I mean, Huey was an incredible force. I loved Huey. I knew Huey, and his last revolutionary activity has occurred. His last political presentation was made at the Uhuru House in Oakland, California. The last two were made there. I mean, we built a whole movement defending Huey when he was under assault by the government for the crime of burning down their own school. It was Farshall. And he was brilliant. He was a very smart man. And he was courageous beyond doubt. But we used to characterize Huey as a kind of a like a shining star, like a flaming star, like a, what do you call it, a comet, a shooting star, He was brilliant at a time, and he made a really important, bold stance, bold statement, and he embraced revolution. And what Huey did was, like the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California, had its origin in the same Black Panther Party, the Black Panthers that we created in St. Petersburg, Florida. We didn't call it the Black Panther Party. We just had we just used all of the logo, the panther, the brand, etc. That was a brand that was created before the Black Panther Party for self-defense in Oakland. And then ours was not the only one either. There were other people who did this, but this was the influence of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And Huey really stepped forward and in a practical way moved to take on the issue that was roiling the movement at the moment, one of the issues. And one of the issues was the question of violence and nonviolence and the legitimacy of armed struggle as a means of defending ourselves. And the Huey P. Newton and the Black Panther Party made an emphatic statement when they stepped forward with the shotgun, influenced by Malcolm X, influenced by everything that had been transpiring in the movement. And he also, adopted, solidarity, unity with the struggle in Vietnam. In fact, people may have forgotten it, but at one time, Huey P. Newton actually publicly told the Vietnamese that they would be willing to send members of the Black Panther Party to fight side by side with comrades in Vietnam against U.S. imperialism. So he was bold, but he was wrong. And this communalism, I've forgotten exactly what the title of this theoretical presentation that he made, because what he did through that was liquidate the existence of nations. He used the evidence of imperialist intrusion to the economies of the world. It's always been like that. It's never a new, as capitalism was born through that imperialist intrusion and capture of and development of the economies of the world as sub-entities. And he used that as evidence of that the disappearance of nations. The nations no longer existed. Instead of nations, there were this international communities everywhere. That's a real oversimplification, but that's what he said. But the consequence of that was liquidation of the national question, because as an example, a practical example of the meaning of that was in 1976. We united with the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, PRSP, who built in Philadelphia, had built this coalition, this national coalition, to the upcoming bicentennial, 200 years, 1776, as you know, the so-called founding of the U.S. and what have you. So there was a bicentennial. Then the U.S. went crazy, with red, white, and blue, trying to rev up the patriotism of everybody. They even painted fire hydrants and even curbstones, red, white, and blue. Everywhere you went, you saw red, white, and blue. Make you think that you were under, some occupation, U.S. occupation. And of course, we were. And so the Puerto Rican Socialist Party played a fundamental role in organizing a coalition to build in Philadelphia what they characterize as a bicentennial without colonies, which is a contradiction, obviously, in terms, right? Why? Because the U.S. was a settler colony itself. So how in the hell could you celebrate 200 years of being a settler colony without colonies? But that was the line. And we went and participated in that, particularly because they raised the colonial question. And there had been a success in crushing the colonial question and making everything about racism. And we were fighting like hell to reintroduce the issue of colonial domination of African people, put it back on the political agenda. So that's why we participated and worked with it. But one of the big, and so in these meetings we were having, we were talking about colonial domination of Africans in the United States, and the biggest contender we had in the meetings was the Black Panther Party. Because they were saying, there ain't no colonies, right? Because Huey said, this thing about intercommunalism means that there are no colonies, et cetera, et cetera. So you can't fight for national liberation, that was a consequence of the philosophy. That was how it tried to play out practically. And I know that was a long-winded way to get there, but you needed to know the history anyhow. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman. So Adam Eterno in Netherlands comments, Uhuru, Honorable Chairman, the current capitalist, imperialist, and neocolonial system has not only killed humaneness, decency, and goodness in mankind, it is also destroying the whole planet.
Yes.
The issue of ecology and sustainability is actual and pressing.
Yes.
There is, in my understanding, a need to scientifically develop and underline the ecological, sustainable potential and nature of socialism.
Yes.
Is this work being done?
It's not being done as much as it should be done, but I really want to embrace the comments that this comrade just made. Because imperialism destroys the planet. And because everything is motivated by profit. And it's really extraordinary how you will find a system that is overseen by a political class, by a class of folk, by a social class, that a system based on greed, based on actual commodity production and everything for the market. Lenin once made the statement that a capitalist will sell you the rope to hang him with. And this is in many ways what you see with imperialism, because they will even destroy themselves, the planet, even their own capacity to exist for profit. And there's all of these so-called, these fake organizations around protecting the planet and from climate disaster and whatever. They're fake. They can't be, because the only thing that can rescue the planet is going to be revolution, overturning of capitalism, the whole social system. That means that what it means effectively and immediately is the colonized peoples in Africa, in Asia, in the Americas and what have you, going to have to take possession, repossession of our resources. We got to make revolution because the planet requires it. And the bourgeoisie, the capitalists, cannot fight in the interest of the planet because they fight only in the interest of profit, 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 profit. And so they will destroy the planet in pursuit of profit, and which is exactly what it is they're doing. And somebody was talking to me the other day about how the impact that slavery had on the climate. They might not have said slavery. I wrote about that some years ago, but they may have said colonialism. But how when the imperialists have gone into places like Africa and other places, what they've done is that they have moved populations, destroyed populations, and then they have affected the production of how does it go, the oxygen, and what's the relationship, the plants, and carbon dioxide and what have you, that created serious distress at different times in history. So it's always, the capitalists, the imperialists, they have always done this, and the only way out of this is revolution, and that the revolutionary socialist movement, must begin to include an analysis and a projection of a liberation that includes repairing the damage that's being done by the imperialists and production, if you will, for human beings. And production for human beings, of course, means that you don't do a kind of production that is involved in destroying the climate and the planet as what is occurring under imperial capitalism.
Uhuru. This comment comes from Chuaniso Lozolo in Houston, Texas. She asks, can you deepen the need for one political party to lead this struggle, and what should qualify such a party?
Yeah, I think that's an important question, and because we've got so many of these, this is one of the pressing problems, I guess, of the revolutionary movement, because we've got all these little organizations which are doing stuff. Some of them, as we mentioned earlier, single issue organizations, but not all of them are. Yeah, and we have to be able to have a revolutionary party that's capable of seizing political power. I mean, that's the objective. It's not being the coolest, out here. It's not just having Uhuru swag, but it is actually the ability to seize power. And all genuine revolutionaries need to gravitate toward that responsibility. And what is necessary, what kind of party are we talking about? We're talking about a party that's guided by revolutionary principles, a party that's guided by, principles of democratic centralism, that's by revolutionary theory. And this is one of the critical issues, advanced revolutionary theory. That's why you would hear people, as someone mentioned earlier, who would take African internationalism, they sound almost like us, they would take African internationalism to promote themselves, but if the revolutionary theory is here, the revolutionary practice is here, and the revolutionary practice is not only here, but it is here, and it is a practice that has developed over nearly 50 years with the institutions and things like that to prove its existence, that is international, that is building organization and our presence throughout the world. If that's the case, then obviously it makes sense that instead of doing your own little thing, which can only satisfy egos and some other kind of interest, you join this revolutionary project. It's the African People's Socialist Party. So you need to have a party, a revolutionary party guided by advanced revolutionary theory for it to be real. It has to have a party where, even as we talk about theory, we understand the primacy of practice that is engaged, as the African People's Socialist Party is engaged even now in the capturing of political power, because political power is not going to be wake up one morning and then the revolutionary just takes power, but it's an ongoing process, and we are building power right now. That's what we talk about, a strategy of dual power, et cetera, being necessary. It's going to have revolutionary cadre, people who actually, for whom revolution is a profession. Revolution is a profession. Whatever other occupation they may have, it has to be an organization of professional revolutionaries. I mean, these are some of the really important criterion, and the critical ideological and political and organizational questions of the world have to be a part of this organization, and that's what we're taking on. We're resolving with building the party throughout the world. It's not just some local entity. It's an entity that has a track record. It has achieved a tremendous amount of experience, political maturity, et cetera. It's guided by advanced revolutionary theory. It is an organization comprised of cadre, not whining prima donnas who, at the drop of a hat, at the first apparent slight to their person, would turn against the whole revolution and the rest of that. Uhuru.
This question is from Tachara Masimba in St. Louis. He asked, Uhuru Chairman, is it correct that Huey P. Newton embraced this notion by V.I. Lenin that capitalism gave rise to imperialism, and in that process, specific colonies no longer existed as a reality, only empires?
Well, the thing about the Black Panther Party, first of all, let me say that's a good possibility that Huey did that. What the comment here is addressing is a position that many Marxist-Leninists, and I say Marxist-Leninists because Lenin is sort of like the New Testament to Marxism, right? He's Lenin, in describing imperialism during a political contest, and this is what I loved about Lenin and most of what he wrote. He didn't just write abstractly. Most of the time he was engaged in struggle, actual struggle. Most of his writings were trying to solve practical political problems that had arisen and that had to be dealt with. And so in this whole contest that had emerged around imperialism and how imperialism was attempting to be defined by sectors of opportunists. And Lenin said that, let's be as clear as we can about what imperialism really is. And he said that, among other things, that imperialism is capitalism developed to its highest stage. It is capitalism that has become rotten ripe. And, that sounds really good. I mean, but Lenin was wrong. And what made it, and it was all right for a contest that you're having just between Europeans and white people. Say, well, imperialism and all of that, and he said imperialism, is capitalism that has become parasitic and some other things. But we say capitalism was born parasitic. It didn't become parasitic because of some relationship that, how it expresses itself in Europe. Capitalism was born parasitic. That's what slavery is. It's a parasite has attacked Africa. Colonialism is a form of parasitism that's imposed on the world by this social system, and out of this grew capitalism, not the other way around. Capitalism grew out of this. And the way you approach the struggle is really affected by how we understand that particular question. That's what this comment was meaning when he said possibly that Huey was influenced by that. Perhaps that was the case. I can't say. Yeah, Uhuru.
Uhuru. Currently, we don't have any other questions. Waiting for more to come in.
Okay. So, usually we have a host of.
Yeah, we have.
We have what?
We have that one question about this thing that just happened in Africa. Hold on a second. It was the African Continental Free Trade Area that was just established. Do you see that question?
What I want to do is, I really want to send a shout out to all of the members of the party and the movement who participate in this study every Sunday. I know it's an important time for members of the party and movement because many people only see us, in demonstrations or in events like this, and they are often attracted to us because of what they think they understand, but we work extremely hard, and I know how hard you comrades work on a daily basis. In fact, many people who are attracted to us initially run out and whining and crying, and they are great revolutionaries until until they get to the work, and then they say we give them mental problems and they get sick and what have you, and they attack the revolution. That happens. This has happened to us in the past. So, and so I know, I'm saying this, I know how hard people work, in this movement. And I really want to appreciate everybody coming to these studies. It's important to come to these studies. Now, it's more important than ever with the growth of the crisis and the numbers of people who are coming into the party to be as clear as it's possible to be about what it is that we're struggling for, who it is that we are. Because we don't want to have disappointed, forces wanting to destroy the revolution because we didn't meet their personal expectations. Let's help people understand who we are. That's part of what our responsibility is, and help people understand it's not for you, it's for the people, it's the revolution, etc. And that's important. Because I've been upset by decisions we've made too, and that's how revolutions are made. We have to have genuine cadre. We have to at least be as good as our enemies. In the sense that our enemies create these organizations, and you see a certain kind of discipline. I saw some really important white people go to prison doing Watergate and all this other stuff, and they never broke ranks. Only one or two of them ever broke ranks, ever punked out, ever, all of them, they went to jail and they did their time, and then they came out and made money and the rest of that and what have you. And we have to at least be as good as they, and recognize that, you're going to be right sometime, perhaps on some question. You're going to be right on some question. The party is going to disagree and say that's not going to go that way. And even though you might be right on some question, the party is always right. I mean, that's the party. The party is the instrument of the people. The party is right. And individuals, won't get the things, won't go the way you want them to go, boo-hoo-hoo. I mean, that happens, but you have to have this instrument and you got to protect it. You got to respect it. And so that the people have the party if they have nothing else, because before the party, the people had nothing. And now they have a revolutionary instrument in their own hands. And that's the thing that has to be protected and fought for and defended at all costs. And it's more important than just, individual aspirations and, what we think of ourselves as individuals. We have to be able to think first of the people, and the party is the instrument that gives us the practical ability to carry out the will of the people. So I know how hard people work, and I appreciate that. And I know that right now people are waiting for the comrades to make the last announcement so that you can run away and do the work that has to be done. In fact, there is a party meeting that's happening, an all-party meeting that's happening within the next 2 hours and next hour and 2 hours or so. And so I know, what's happening, and I just want to just say that you're in the right place right now, those of you in the party and in the movement, and it's respected and appreciated, because we have a saying here. It's something like Vanguard up. Vanguard up, Uhuru Comrades, yeah.
Uhuru, Chairman. We did get a couple of questions while you were talking. Do you want to do?
It's up to you. I mean, you know what we're working with.
Yes.
In terms of,
okay. All right. So one of the questions, because in the beginning, and I know you said we'd have to have a whole nother discussion about reparations. But one of the questions is from Dexter from Boston. He asks, would we ever consider doing another world tribunal on reparations?
Yeah. In fact, one of the things we've been talking about, in fact, we acquired some resources, not enough, but many years ago that we've stashed this in a bank or something right now. We wanted to do a world tribunal on reparations. And we wanted to do, initially, we thought we were going to do it in Berlin, Germany. And have Africans from all over the world participate in that. We thought we were going to do it in Berlin because that's where the Berlin conference happened, and we were characterizing it as return to the scene of the crime, but some of the forces we were trying to work with in Berlin, they had this relationship to the German government, and they were really opportunistic, and it was problematic, so we couldn't do it there. And I think at the time we had called it the International Tribunal on Reparations for African People, or ITRAP. Then we said the World Tribunal for Reparations for African People, WeTrap. So we were talking about doing it. Then, we looked at the possibility of doing it someplace on the continent of Africa, and that's still a real possibility, to bring African people from all over the world and to do the first quantification of value that's stolen from African people globally. South Africa, seemed like a great place for that to happen because there's enough, quote unquote, democratic space in South Africa. There's enough infrastructure development in certain places in South Africa to facilitate the kind of work we need to do to stream it all around the world. There'll probably be an issue of certain kind of resources because we want historians and we want economists and Africans and other kinds of forces from everywhere. And then we want to be able to bring Africans with our own experiences throughout the African world to come. And this would be an extraordinary, revolutionary kind of event to have Africans from everywhere, to come and then get a fix on just how much is being stolen from Africa every day. Every one of those trains in Sierra Leone that runs 24 hours a day to the mines and to the ship that never stop. Trains that are miles long, all of this stuff can be quantified and Africans can have access to that. That is going to be a powerful thing. So yeah, we're thinking about doing that, and that's one of the things we were thinking about doing. Of course, we might do something locally, that is to say, within the U.S. itself, but the World Tribunal, the International Tribunal is something that really we want to be able to do. Uhuru.
Yeah, and just for everyone who is viewing, and this may be your first experience with the African People's Socialist Party, but the whole question of reparations being this mainstream topic today, it started in 1982 when the chairman initiated the world tribunals that happened throughout this country, 12 consecutive world tribunals to put the U.S. and European imperialism on trial for the crimes committed against African people. So just giving you guys that background, so it'll be really exciting, what Chairman is talking about for the World Tribunals. So just want to salute our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, for that brilliant study. So because of time, we want everyone to know that if your question was not answered, one of our moderators will correspond with you and make sure that the chairman does see your question. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For your worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, visit theburningspear.com. For revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. Did you unite with what you heard today and want to learn more about how you can get involved with the African People's Socialist Party? Visit apspuhuru.org for all information regarding how you can apply. Tune in on June 17th, this Wednesday, upcoming Wednesday at 7 p.m. in the chairman's hosted webinar, It's Bigger Than St. Pete, Reparations on the Ballot, a discussion with the chairman and 2 candidates running for St. Pete City Council on a reparations platform, live from the chairman's page. So if you're on Facebook right now, it'll be hosted from this same page. That's, again, June 17th at 7 p.m. Start preparing to attend the 10th annual conference of the Black is Back Coalition on August 10th and 11th, themed Turn Imperialist Wars into Wars Against Imperialism, happening in St. Louis at the Uhuru House on West Florissant. For more info, visit blackisbackcoalition.org. Registration will be open soon. Order your copy of Chairman Omali Yeshitela's latest book, Vanguard, The Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, the political report to the 7th Congress at burningspearmarketplace.com. And were you moved by Chairman's presentation, you can bring this electrifying presentation to your school campus, bookstore, concert hall, and more. To book Chairman Omali Yeshitela for the Vanguard 2019 International Speaking Tour, contact Uhuru Tours at info@omaliyeshitela.org or call 727-914-3621. Sign up for the Marcus Garvey Legacy Cruise. The Marcus Garvey Legacy Cruise is the annual fundraiser held to support the work of the African Socialist International. The African Socialist International is an organization made up of African people located virtually on every continent, dedicated to overturning the conditions faced by African people worldwide. Due to imperialism in crisis, the U.S. has initiated a travel ban on Cuba, which was one of our original destinations, so please call the travel agent Linda Stern to find out the alternative destinations. She can be reached at 732-972-4171. And if you want to further support the ASI and the Marcus Garvey Legacy Cruise, you can make a donation by visiting uhurulegacycruise.org. So thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru.